Hello and welcome to Camera Review. Today we are looking at two very important cameras, Panasonic Lumix GH5 and Sony A7 Mark II. These two cameras have caused quite a stir in the camera industry and have become the favorites for videographers. And I wanted to share with you the reasons why this has happened and which one is perhaps the better camera for video applications. So let's start with Sony A7 Mark II. As you may know, Sony has made 4K video accessible to consumers by introducing a line of cameras that's both reasonably priced and offer high quality video. What in effect Sony has done is listen to the consumers, the market, and the demands from the videographers, and introduced not one but three cameras in the same line: the A7, A7R, and A7S. Because as any experienced photographer or a videographer will tell you, is that no one camera can do everything perfectly. What I mean by that is, if you want a high resolution photographs, you probably will need to choose a camera with higher megapixels. So Sony offers A7R for that. But a videographer does not need those high megapixels. Instead, what he or she will need is perhaps larger pixels so that it can perform better under low light circumstances. And for this reason, Sony has kept the A7's sensors in the same size but has offered only 12 megapixels. This is why Sony's A7 has become the king of low light DSLR video cameras. Panasonic, on the other hand, has taken a different approach. Their GH line of cameras are not full frame, but they offer micro four thirds sensor. So what does that mean for the video purposes? And what does that mean if you are filming with a GH5 versus an A7S? Now, there's a huge crop factor of 2 when you compare a full-size, full-frame sensor to a micro four thirds sensor, which is the sensor you use on GH5. That means a micro four thirds sensor is about half the size of a full-frame sensor. That means it will need more light to produce the same quality of images, given that everything else remains the same. So if you have the same type of lens, the same type of camera, only the size of the sensor had changed, then you will need more light. But as you all know, everything else rarely ever remains the same. So for example, the older version of GH5, which is GH4, has a crop factor of 2.33 because in video mode, GH4 was already cropping a small size sensor to push those boundaries in video capabilities. But that meant that the ISO levels had to be higher. Now with GH5, that has all changed. GH5 uses the whole sensor to capture video, effectively reducing that 2.33 factor down to 2. So what does that mean for the person who wants to capture video with GH5 versus a person who wants to use a Sony A7 Mark II? It means that there are choices to be made and compromises to be considered. So let me explain that a bit, okay? What is important here to understand is that both Sony and Panasonic are offering two different types of products for videographers and perhaps photographers as well. And if you look at Panasonic in its own category and Sony in its own category, you will see that they are two unique products, but they appeal to different type of users. For example, if you are to consider GH5, it has its own advantages and disadvantages. One of them being the crop factor. And crop factor is a major determinant on whether to choose it for low light circumstances. Also cropping on the image sensor. Now it is using the full sensor, which means that in the past it was needing to use more light gathering capabilities to produce the same image, which is now can be produced by using the full sensor size. Now, of course, there's an upside to that, which is that the camera is lighter compared to 7AS Mark II, which makes the gimbal work a lot easier. Plus the fact that general Micro Four Thirds cameras, okay, in general, comparing to Olympus and everything else, they cost less and their lenses cost less. So when you price compare a Sony A7 Mark II to the new GH5, there's an obvious price difference of about 50%. So that is of course to be expected that Sony is offering a full frame sensor which is more sensitive to light and has more light gathering capabilities, and because of that uses a larger sensor surface to utilize during video recording. But on the other hand, the lenses are more expensive, especially if you're looking at high-end Zeiss lenses that are made for Sony's E-mount cameras. So what does the sensor actually size do? Because now we know the GH5 is offering high quality images even under low light circumstances. So the sensor actually is designed to help the noise level to be reduced and the image quality to go up. But here's the important thing to understand. The size of the pixels is the major determinant on noise level and image quality. And that's not to say that GH5, with its 20 megapixel sensor, is anything less than what A7S is doing. And it has come a long way in terms of reducing the noise and improving the low light performance. And for this reason, GH5 now appeals to videographers who are not shy from working under less than ideal lighting circumstances. And based on the advantages of sensor size, we can say that Sony has an advantage, but that's only half the picture to consider. Coding system is another thing that we must look into. So let's take a look at GH5, for example. Panasonic was smart to allow V-Log type of coding to improve the dynamic range of the camera. So this makes GH5 possibly the best camera in terms of video coding systems. Now, on the other side, of course, there is Sony's system, but Sony doesn't use V-Log. And of course, Panasonic didn't include this V-Log coding in their cameras. You have to purchase it separately, which is shipped to you, and then you have to install it. And that's an additional cost if you're going to buy the GH5. But even though I prefer that they would include such a coding system, the fact that it's available makes it very good for use for anyone who wants to get into making films or videos or use it for general event purposes. Now, if you are going to use V-Log, you must know that it improves the post-production capabilities of the footage you get from the GH5. But how does it compare to Sony's A7S Mark II coding system? Now, Sony has taken a different route altogether they have their own coding system, which you may have used in the past or may have heard about it, and they're called the S-logs, and S-log2 and S-log3, which is a great coding system, dramatically improves the quality of the video that you get, plus the images, and this makes it easier for color correcting, or if you're going to use a noise reduction application, so you get better results from the noise levels. Now, it's hard to say that S-log is not as good as V-log. They're both very good. The end result is that they're both good for color correcting and for editing, and that's what's important. Especially if you compare this to Canon's JPEG type of format, which is very hard to process. So having both coding systems that are very strong makes these cameras one of the best cameras in the market for use for videos. But there is another factor to consider, which is that they have come a long way from, if you compare it from GH1 all the way to GH5, that in that period of time, the cameras were at first trying to attain an HD quality. And then it moved to a point where we have 4K quality. And companies like Netflix and Amazon are now requiring that the videos come in, or the films come in 4K, and HD is not sufficient for that purposes. And you might ask why? Because the technology has moved forward, and TVs are beginning to offer 4K resolution. So it makes sense for camera companies, to keep pace with the changing dynamics of the market. And for that reason, as we see year after year progression on GH4 to GH5, or what will happen from A7S Mark II to A7 Mark III, is the improvement in quality. And another factor important here to consider is the videographers before had to use expensive gimbals and tripods to attain decent footage. So what has happened is that Panasonic and Sony have put in stabilization systems into their cameras. They incorporated so that the stabilization systems work with the lenses, and this automatically improves the time it takes to film and the quality. And this was unheard of 5 years ago. Of course, this didn't get swept under the rug. Companies are still trying to see how Sony and Panasonic are able to do this. And you look at a company like Canon, they still don't have stabilization. And it is for this reason companies are competing in a market where features like stabilization and vlogs and codings have made a big difference in the choice that people considering when they are buying cameras for video. And in camera stabilization, of course, helps to a point where you get a steady image, but before it was only lenses. Now lenses work in unison with the camera bodies to improve the stabilization, and that has gone up to 5 stops, and that is incredible. That means you can shoot in low light without having to worry about getting steady footage. And if you are doing handheld photography or handheld videos, then you can use these images for your videos or for your photographs. Now, combine that stabilization with gimbals, the process becomes more and more interesting, because now you are able to move around and make videos and films like it was never before done. You get quality that's almost Hollywood quality, with steady shots. And before, it used to take thousands and thousands of dollars of equipment to achieve this. Now you can do this simply by a handheld gimbal and image stabilization between the cameras. Now we have GH5, we have the A7 Mark II, which soon will be replaced with Mark III in terms of image quality and noise. And this makes sense from the point of Sony, because they need to bring in their cameras into the new market. Of course, this is very important because if you are going to release your camera, you have to make sure that your older cameras are sold. So when should we expect this? Well, it's going to be very soon. And if you're going to film, you are going to have to make a choice. If you're going to choose GH5, it's a different choice than if you are going to choose a Sony. For example, if you choose a Sony and you're only producing videos for YouTube, then you need only 3840 instead of 4096 pixels, which is what GH5 offers. So owning a GH5 will not yield you extra benefits in terms of image size if you are uploading to YouTube. But what GH5 will give you is the latitude of extra size to adjust framing within the post without losing quality or needing to crop. On the other hand, if you are a filmmaker, you want to offer cinematic images and in a cinematic format for film festivals, or if you want to do work for clients, then the answer is quite simple. You can get GH5 with 10-bit coding because you're going to get a higher quality image and of course a bigger size image, so that will help you in the post-production. Now you might say, what about A7S Mark II? Well, that has its own advantages for the fact that they have a larger sensor size. It makes it better for the low light circumstances in general. Now GH5 with their in-camera processing now offers quality that rivals or maybe supersedes low light filming capabilities of A7 Mark II. But we will see what happens when A7 Mark III comes in. And another important thing to consider is that the GH5 is lighter, and in general their lenses, the Micro Four Thirds lenses are lighter, so it makes the gimbal work easier, it makes the use a lot easier, and the file sizes are more reasonably manageable. And if you own, for example, full frame camera and you are going to use it on a crop factor sensor, which is like the GH5, your 50mm comes to 100mm, which makes it more or less not very practical for most filming circumstances. So what that means is that you need to go out and purchase new lenses that will help you to film, let's say, at 24mm or 35mm focal lengths. And those of course means additional investment into a system. But those systems of course are here to stay, because we're gonna see probably GH6, 7 come out in the years to come. So there is basically no way of getting around the fact that you have to make a major investment into a category of lenses, and that also must be incorporated in the budget that you are going to do if you are going to get to GH5 or the Micro Four Third type sensor type of videos. Now on the other side, Sony A7 Mark II, you can use the Leicas, the Canons, the Nikons, the full frame sensors, because they are a full frame camera, and that means you can sell, for example, your Nikon or your Canon camera to buy a Sony lens and use it with your Sony. And in the short term, that means you need to take less money and put it into A7, even though the camera costs more. And of course, that gives you the flexibility to use multiple different types of lenses with your camera, whereas in the Micro Four Thirds, you probably will have to get only Micro Four Thirds lenses. Now, buying, for example, native Sony mount lenses, that's another important thing to consider, because Sony lenses are great, they are sharp, they're contrasty, most are made and designed by Zeiss, but Zeiss branded E-mount lenses, well, they have their ups and their downsides, and that's one thing you must take into consideration, because Sony lenses for now have achromatic aberration issues, which we call purple fringing, as is commonly referred. So what that means is that if you are photographing, you can go to Lightroom and you have purple fringing, you can correct it easily. But in film, that is another issue. So what I can tell you as a filmmaker is that there is no easy way to correct a chromatic aberration in video. That is very time consuming and it's almost impossible to do it effectively or fast. So if you are going to dive into a Sony type of E-mount lenses, this is something that you need to consider. Now, if you have a range of, for example, Canon lenses or Leica lenses or Nikon lenses, you can use it with a mount adapter, which will save you money in the short term and of course will give you the added benefit of being able to use it. But investing in a system is a decision making, and you have to consider both pluses and minuses of both systems. Now, if you go on the internet and you start searching, you're gonna see only the positive things about one system or the other, whether it be a Sony or a GH5. But not all pluses and minuses of owning both systems are explained. And this is especially important if you are the first-time buyer of these systems. I mean, I own both of them, I love them both, but how I use them comes down to the decision that I have to make on case-by-case circumstances, and it will always depend on the circumstances. For example, if I'm traveling, I personally like to travel light. If I'm gonna bring full-frame lenses, they're gonna be heavy. So for me, when I'm traveling, if I'm going to Peru, Ecuador, and I'm gonna do filming, I need a lighter equipment to carry around. So GH5 is the better option for that. That means I can take my lenses and multiple lenses because they're small size, but I cannot take my Leica Noctilux, which is a beautiful lens, but too heavy and too big. But with Sony, I would be able to do that, but then it will be very, very heavy. So that is something that we need to measure. And for example, if you love wide open apertures, there is Leica's 42.5mm f1.2, which gives this creamy bokeh at 85mm equivalent, and that makes justification of owning more expensive fast lenses for the micro four thirds GH5 type of camera. Now, also, one thing I always advise anyone who wants to get into any of these systems is that you must buy high quality optics. That is more important than anything else. Even if you are on a budget, get one lens, maybe two, but you don't need all those zooms. You don't need all those primes with different focal lengths. Yes, they are nice to haves, but if you can cover moderately wide angles like 30 to 35mm and have a good 50mm, that's a very good start, because in 6 months time, when you have more money, you can go and purchase your 85mm equivalent Lumix Leica 42.5mm lens, which will give you the 85mm. But you are going to use more often focal lengths between 24 to 50 than the 85 to 135mm. And this is very, very important to understand, because whether you're choosing Sony's A7 Mark II or GH5, you are going to get very nice images, but that will all depend on having good lighting and excellent optics. If you are, skimping on the optics, then your images are not going to be as great. So consider your camera and your lens as one complete package if you are going to invest in a system. Now, at this current time, which one is better to go and invest in? Well, I will go with the GH5 because it has just come out. You will get great quality, you get great images. Your camera will hold its value for at least a year. With the A7 series, now they are due for a new release. So now you won't hear any announcements from the company yet, because there's a good reason for that. No one would buy or would want to buy their older cameras and the camera stores will be stuck with all those older cameras, or where they have to do a kind of a sale if the new camera comes out. So they're keeping it under the wraps. But you have to understand the way the market works and what you should be expecting in the near future, and that is Sony will have to announce the new camera, and that should be no later than perhaps May, because if you consider when the filming period usually happens, it's in the summer months. So Sony is smart in that respect. They know that people are going to be buying their cameras, and they probably will be buying them sometime between March and April, and if they see the Sony new camera coming out, they'll be more likely to purchase it. Now, the summer months, as I was mentioning, is very important, because that's when people who are filmmakers or videographers buy their cameras, because they know they're going to use it through the summer, make their money, and then perhaps look for the next model in the next year to come. But they will not buy a camera if it's announced in August or September, because then the market is kind of low for contracts. And this is very, very important to consider and understand how the market shares are going to shift in the DSLR world, especially with the one with the video capabilities and mirrorless cameras. Because you notice that Canon is coming out with their M5s, M6, and then Sony is waiting the gun, so they're gonna start sometime, probably April, May. We're gonna hear their announcements. So what we'll have with the A7S Mark III is another topic which I know and expect certain improvements to come, but for now, this is what we need to consider: the GH5 versus the A7. GH5 is the one to go for. And before we bring this session to a close, I would like you to take a moment and visit the comment section below, because you're going to find a donation button there. And if you have enjoyed this review, I invite you to go and support us into making more videos by making a small donation. And our promise to you is to bring you independent reviews that is high quality, informative, and in return we ask that you help us to make these videos. And even if it's a small sum, it will help us to produce these videos where you can watch it and make better decisions in your next camera purchases. And please also visit our website at camerareview.ca, and we hope to see you in our next review. Thank you for watching.